We all know how important our hearts are. But you know what's crazy? Something as simple as electrolytes can really make a difference in how well it works.
Yeah.
So in this deep dive, we're going to be taking a look at a presentation by Dr. Narendra Kumar, who is a cardiologist and electrophysiologist.
Okay.
And he really digs deep into this whole connection between electrolytes and heart health.
Cool.
And by the end of this, you're going to have a much better understanding of how to keep your own ticker ticking.
I love that.
So
Yeah.
Dr. Kumar really emphasizes how powerful these tiny electrolytes are.
He does. It's fascinating.
So let's jump right in with hyperkalemia,
Okay.
which is basically when you have too much potassium.
Right.
Dr. Kumar actually calls it a silent threat.
Hmm.
So why is that? Why is it so dangerous?
Well, what's really sneaky about hyperkalemia is that one of the first signs that shows up is a change in your heart's electrical activity.
Okay.
And specifically, you see like a taller T wave on an EKG.
Mm.
And this can happen even before you have any like noticeable symptoms.
Yeah.
So it's like this little blip on your heart's radar saying something's off.
So your body's trying to warn you, but you might not even know it.
Exactly.
Mm.
And as your potassium levels rise even more, it can get worse.
Oh.
Your heart rate might slow down. The electrical signals can get disrupted.
Wow.
And like really bad cases, you can even develop arrhythmias that can be life-threatening.
So even just a little increase in potassium is something to be careful about.
For sure. Regular checkups and blood work can help you keep track of those levels.
Now, what about the flip side? Not enough potassium.
Yeah.
So that's hypokalaemia.
Right.
And Dr. Kumar says it's way more than just a leg cramp.
Definitely.
So what else happens?
Well, when your potassium levels get too low, your heart's electrical system starts acting up again. But this time you might actually see a smaller T wave on the EKG.
Oh, interesting.
You might also see something called U waves, which are these little extra bumps that pop up.
It's so interesting that both high and low potassium cause changes in the T waves, just like in the opposite ways.
Right. It's like the EKG is giving us a clue about what's going on with the potassium.
Yeah.
And just like with hyperkalemia, hypokalaemia can also lead to irregular heart rhythms,
Okay.
including this really dangerous one called torsades de pointe.
Oh, I've heard of that one. That one's scary.
It could be fatal.
Yeah, Dr. Kumar also mentioned a link between low potassium and low magnesium,
Oh, yeah.
or hypomagnesemia.
That's super important.
It seems like they often go together.
They do. Magnesium is kind of like a supporting actor here. It helps stabilize those electrical signals.
Right.
So when you're low on magnesium and potassium, the risk of those dangerous arrhythmias goes way up.
So those two, we really got to make sure we keep in balance.
Absolutely. They work together to keep your heart beating steady.
Now we can't forget about calcium,
Right.
which is another major electrolyte that Dr. Kumar says can impact the heart.
Absolutely. Both too much and too little calcium can cause problems.
So let's start with not having enough.
Okay.
Hypocalcemia.
So the main sign on an EKG for hypocalcaemia is a prolonged QT interval.
Okay.
So this means the heart's electrical recharging process is taking longer than it should, which increases the risk of those scary arrhythmias.
So the EKG can give us another clue, a longer QT interval, that there could be something up with the calcium levels?
Yep. It's like having different flags for different electrolyte problems on the EKG.
And what's interesting is that Dr. Kumar mentioned the shape of the T wave, that little bump we talked about,
Yeah.
usually stays the same with hypocalcaemia,
Right.
unlike those changes we saw with potassium. So that's one way to kind of tell them apart.
Exactly.
Now, what about having too much calcium? Hypercalcaemia.
Okay, so when you have too much calcium, you might see a shortened QT interval
Okay.
and this weird little bump called an Osborne wave on the EKG.
An Osborne wave. I've never heard of that.
It's a pretty distinctive sign of hypercalcaemia. And here's the tricky part.
Yeah.
High calcium levels can actually look like a heart attack on an EKG.
Really? That's kind of
Yeah,
scary.
It is. So a simple blood test to check your calcium levels could prevent a misdiagnosis.
That makes a lot of sense. So we've talked about potassium, magnesium, and calcium, but Dr. Kumar also mentioned magnesium,
Yeah.
which is another one that he says is more common than we might think.
You're right. Hypomagnesemia. It kind of flies under the radar
It does.
because it tends to hang out with the other electrolyte problems like low potassium and low calcium.
So it's like a triple threat.
Exactly.
Mm.
And what's even more concerning is that the causes of hypomagnesemia are often things we don't even think twice about.
Like what?
Digestive issues, kidney problems,
Right.
even some medications,
Like what kind of medications?
like diuretics.
Those are pretty common.
They are. especially thiazide and loop diuretics, which are prescribed a lot for high blood pressure and heart failure.
Yeah,
They can flush out extra fluid, which is good,
right.
but they can also take magnesium with them.
Oh, no.
And because magnesium often goes hand in hand with low potassium and low calcium, it can actually make those problems worse.
So it's like a domino effect.
Pretty much.
Hmm.
And Dr. Kumar really emphasizes that recognizing the signs of hypomagnesemia on an EKG is super important.
What are those signs?
Well, we're talking about things like a prolonged PR interval,
Okay.
which is basically the time it takes for electrical signals to travel through the heart,
Okay.
and even the presence of those extra heartbeats we mentioned before.
And if it's not addressed, hypomagnesemia can also increase the risk of ventricular tachycardia and ventricular fibrillation,
Absolutely.
which are those life-threatening arrhythmias we talked about.
Exactly. And when you're treating hypomagnesemia, Dr. Kumar really stresses that it's not just about getting your magnesium levels back to normal.
Oh, really?
You actually want to aim higher,
How much higher?
above 2.0 MEQL. And you got to make sure your potassium levels are above 4.0 MEQL too.
So it's not just about fixing the deficiency, it's about hitting a specific target.
Right. That's the sweet spot for protecting your heart.
So we've covered a lot about individual electrolytes, but what about their impact on a bigger issue like heart failure?
Yeah. That's where things get a little more complicated because heart failure is already a tricky condition.
It is.
And electrolyte disturbances can really throw a wrench in the works.
Yeah. Dr. Kumar mentioned that hyponatremia, hypokalaemia, and hypomagnesemia are pretty common in people with heart failure.
They are.
Why is that?
Well, it has to do with how the body tries to deal with the heart not pumping as effectively as it should.
Right.
Think about it. Fluid build up hormonal changes,
Yeah.
and then often you have medications like diuretics to manage those issues.
Okay.
All of this can really mess with the balance of electrolytes.
So it's like this vicious cycle.
Exactly. The heart failure leads to electrolyte imbalances, which then make the heart failure worse.
And it's crucial for folks with heart failure to know about this.
It is.
Because those electrolyte imbalances can make their symptoms even worse, make them more likely to get arrhythmias, and it can even affect how well they do in the long run. So monitoring those electrolyte levels is super important for heart failure patients. This has been really eye-opening. But I gotta admit, it's also a lot to take in.
I know, right? We've covered so much about electrolytes and their impact on the heart.
We have, but there's still more to learn.
There is.
Like what?
Well, we've mainly talked about the heart,
Right.
but Dr. Kumar also points out how these electrolyte imbalances can affect other parts of the body too.
Really? Beyond just the heart.
Yeah, and that's where things get even more interesting.
Yeah.
But we'll have to dive into those details in the next part of our deep dive.
Sounds good. I'm ready for part 2.
Me too. So we were talking about how these electrolyte imbalances can really mess with your heart.
We were. It's crazy how much damage those tiny little things can do.
Right. It's wild.
Yeah. So let's get back to those peaked T waves we saw on the EKG with hyperkalemia.
Yeah.
It's like our body's sending us a secret message.
It is. It's
Yeah.
like a little sneak peek into what's happening with your potassium levels.
So Dr. Kumar explained that those peaked T waves actually happen because high potassium levels mess with the heart's repolarization process.
Right.
Okay, now hold on. Remind me again, what exactly is repolarization? It's been a while since biology class.
Oh, yeah. So basically, it's like the heart's reset button.
Okay.
After each heartbeat, the heart muscle cells need to, like, recharge,
Yeah,
get back to their resting state
Got it.
before they can beat again.
right.
That's repolarization. And potassium is really important for making sure that happens smoothly.
Okay.
But when there's too much potassium, it throws everything off balance.
Oh.
And that's when you see those T waves getting taller on the EKG.
It's just amazing to me how something so small can have such a big impact on the heart.
Yeah, it really is. And as those potassium levels keep climbing, you start to see other changes on the EKG too,
Like what?
like abnormalities in the P waves and longer PR intervals.
Yay. Those are signs that the electrical signals are getting messed up.
Exactly. It's like the communication system in the heart is breaking down.
And if it's not fixed, it can lead to all those scary things we talked about.
Right, like a slower heart rate blocks signals and those dangerous arrhythmias.
Like ventricular fibrillation.
Exactly, which can be fatal.
It's a domino effect, and it can get pretty serious.
It can. So catching hyperkalemia early is really important.
Now, what about when potassium is too low?
Okay,
We talked about those U waves popping up on the EKG with hypokalemia.
right.
So what's going on there?
So low potassium actually affects both the depolarization and repolarization phases of the heart's electrical cycle.
Okay, back up for a second. Depolarization, that's the part where the heart muscle contracts, right? Like the go signal.
Exactly. It's the trigger for the heartbeat. And hypokalaemia makes this phase longer.
So the heart has to work harder to contract.
Right.
And then those U waves we see on the EKG, that's from the prolonged repolarization.
Yep. It's like the heart is taking an extra beat to get back to its resting state.
So high and low potassium can both mess with the heart's rhythm, but in different ways.
Exactly. And luckily, those EKG changes can give doctors clues about what's going on.
The EKG is like a secret decoder ring for the heart.
I like that. It's like a window into what's happening with the electrical activity.
We keep mentioning these dangerous arrhythmias.
Yeah.
Are there certain types of arrhythmias that are linked to specific electrolyte imbalances?
There are. One that Dr. Kumar talked about is torsades de pointes.
Okay.
It's associated with hypokalaemia, and it has this really distinct pattern on the EKG that looks like a twisting of the points.
That sounds kind of ominous.
It is. It's a type of ventricular tachycardia, which means the heart's lower chambers are beating too fast.
Okay.
And it can quickly turn into ventricular fibrillation.
Which is when the heart's just quivering instead of beating effectively.
Yeah. It's a real medical emergency.
So if someone has torsades de pointes, they need help fast.
Absolutely.
So we've got torsades de pointes linked to low potassium. What about other arrhythmias? Are there any that are associated with like low magnesium or something?
Definitely. Dr. Kumar said that low magnesium, which is hypomagnesaemia, can also increase your risk of those dangerous rhythms like ventricular tachycardia and ventricular fibrillation.
So both low potassium and low magnesium can lead to serious heart problems.
And remember, they often happen together, which makes things even riskier.
It's like a double whammy.
It is.
Yeah.
And then there's also hypocalcaemia, which can cause QT prolongation.
Right, which means the heart's taking longer to recharge.
Exactly. And that can lead to a type of arrhythmia called polymorphic ventricular tachycardia, or PMVT.
Okay, another one to add to the list.
And like the others we've talked about, PMVT can be life-threatening.
So there are all these different arrhythmias that can be caused by electrolyte imbalances. It seems like keeping those electrolytes in check is super important.
It really is. Those imbalances can totally mess up your heart's electrical system and lead to some pretty serious consequences.
So what can people do to protect themselves?
Prevention is key.
Of course.
Having a healthy lifestyle, eating a balanced diet, and staying hydrated are all really important.
Makes sense. And if you have any health conditions, talking to your doctor about monitoring your electrolyte levels is a good idea.
Absolutely.
Speaking of monitoring, Dr. Kumar mentioned that certain medications can mess with your electrolyte levels.
Right, like diuretics.
Are there any other medications we should be aware of?
There are. Some medications for heart failure, like digoxin, can increase the risk of hypokalaemia.
Okay.
And even some antibiotics and antifungals can affect your electrolytes.
Wow. So it's really important to talk to your doctor about all the medications you're taking.
Absolutely.
Oh.
Even over-the-counter ones. You
Yeah.
want to make sure they're not interacting with your electrolyte levels?
Now, Dr. Kumar didn't just focus on the bad stuff.
Oh, yeah.
He also talked about some good things that certain electrolytes can do for your heart.
He did. He mentioned that potassium can actually help decrease the heart's sensitivity to catecholamines.
Catecholamines, those are the fight or flight hormones, right? Like adrenaline.
You got it. Get your heart racing and your blood pumping.
So having enough potassium can help keep those stress hormones in check.
Exactly.
Good to know. Are there any other benefits of potassium?
Potassium can also help get rid of excess sodium through your urine.
It flushes out the sodium.
Yep. It's called natriuresis.
So that's got to be good for blood pressure.
It is. It also helps widen your blood vessels, which improves blood flow.
That's amazing. So potassium is like a triple threat.
It is. It helps with stress hormones, blood pressure, and blood flow. It's a real superhero for your heart.
So how do we actually measure these electrolyte levels?
The most common way is with a blood test.
Okay, so if you're worried about your electrolytes, you just ask your doctor for a blood test?
Pretty much. You take a little bit of blood, send it to the lab, and then you get the results for all the different electrolytes.
Like potassium, magnesium, calcium, sodium?
Yep. All of them.
And once you have those results, what happens next?
That's where the treatment plan comes in.
Okay.
And it really depends on which electrolyte is out of whack and how bad it is.
So it's different for everyone.
It is.
Hmm.
For some people, just making some changes to their diet, drinking more water, or tweaking their meds or supplements might be enough.
So sometimes it's pretty easy to fix.
It can be, but for more severe cases, you might need medication.
Like what kind of medication?
Well, it depends on which electrolyte is off.
Mm-hmm.
If you have hypokalaemia, your doctor might prescribe potassium supplements.
Okay.
If it's hypomagnesaemia, you might need magnesium supplements.
Makes sense. Just replacing what's missing?
Exactly. But sometimes it's more complicated. Like with hyperkalemia, you need to lower the potassium levels.
How do you do that?
There are meds that help your kidneys get rid of extra potassium.
Okay.
And in really serious cases, you might even need dialysis.
Dialysis? That's pretty intense.
It is. It's a procedure that filters your blood to remove waste products and extra electrolytes.
Yeah.
So it's usually only used in those really tough cases.
So there are a lot of different treatment options depending on how bad the imbalance is.
Yep. It all starts with knowing the signs, talking to your doctor,
Yeah.
and getting those electrolyte levels checked.
This is all really interesting, but I gotta be honest, it's a lot to remember.
It is. There's a lot to it.
There's so much to know about electrolytes and their impact on the heart.
I hear you.
Mm.
But the main thing to remember is awareness. Pay attention to those signs and symptoms we talked about.
Like muscle weakness, fatigue cramps, numbness, tingling.
Yep.
Even things like confusion or headaches.
Exactly. And if you notice any of those, especially if they come on suddenly or are really bad,
Yeah.
don't wait.
Go to the doctor.
Exactly. Don't mess around with those electrolytes.
So to recap, electrolytes like potassium, magnesium, and calcium are super important for a healthy heart.
Right.
And any imbalances in those electrolytes can cause all sorts of problems, from weird blips on an EKG to life-threatening arrhythmias.
We also talked about how some medications can mess with those electrolytes.
Yeah. And how important it is to be open with your doctor about your meds and any concerns you have.
And we talked about how important early detection and treatment is.
Whether that's simple lifestyle changes or more serious things like medication or dialysis.
Hopefully you're feeling a little more knowledgeable about these minerals and how they affect your heart.
I know I am. But we're not done yet. There's still one more part of this deep dive to go.
We still have to talk about how these electrolyte imbalances can affect other parts of the body.
Ooh, I'm intrigued. Can't wait to hear about that.
Me too. It's pretty fascinating.
Welcome back to part 3 of our deep dive into electrolytes.
Part 3 already.
I know, right? Time flies when you're talking about minerals.
It does.
We spent the last 2 parts really focused on the heart.
We have. It's amazing how much those tiny electrolytes can impact such a vital organ.
Totally. But, like we mentioned before, electrolytes don't just affect the heart.
Right, they have a much broader impact on the body.
Exactly. So let's explore that a little more.
Let's do it.
Last time we were talking about how electrolyte imbalances can affect other organs and systems.
We were.
So let's dig into that.
Okay, so remember how we talked about potassium being super important for the depolarization and repolarization of heart muscle cells?
Yeah, those electrical signals that make the heart beat.
Right. Well, it turns out potassium is just as important for all the muscles in your body, not just the heart.
Oh, wow. So an imbalance in potassium could affect how all our muscles work.
Exactly. Hypokalaemia or low potassium can lead to all sorts of muscle issues.
Like what?
Weakness, fatigue, cramps.
Okay, those sound familiar.
And in severe cases, even paralysis.
Paralysis. That's kind of scary.
It can be, especially if it affects the muscles you need for breathing. That's why having enough potassium is so important.
So those bananas and potatoes are our friends.
They are.
Now, what about nerves? What do electrolytes have to do with those?
Well, electrolytes, especially sodium and potassium, are crucial for transmitting those electrical impulses that travel along our nerves.
So they're like the messengers of the nervous system.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
They help relay signals from the brain to the muscles, telling them when to move,
Okay.
and from the sensory organs back to the brain so we can feel sensations.
So if there's an electrolyte imbalance, those signals get messed up.
Exactly. And that can cause a bunch of different neurological symptoms.
Like what?
It really depends on which electrolyte is off and how bad it is. But some common ones are numbness, tingling, muscle twitching,
Okay.
and in more serious cases, even seizures.
Wow. It's crazy how something like a little dip in potassium or sodium can have such a big effect on the nerves.
It is. It shows just how important that balance is for our whole body.
Okay, last stop on our electrolyte tour, the brain.
Ah, yes, the command center.
How do these minerals affect brain function?
Well, the brain needs a very specific balance of electrolytes to work, right?
Okay.
And any changes to that balance can really mess things up.
So even small variations can cause problems.
They can. Like hypernatremia or low sodium can cause confusion, headaches, even seizures.
Wow.
And in really bad cases, it can even lead to a coma or be fatal.
It's incredible how a simple mineral like sodium is so important for our brain.
And the sodium is definitely a big one. But the other electrolytes play a role too.
Like how?
Well, calcium's involved in nerve signal transmission in the brain. And magnesium helps regulate neurotransmitters, which are those chemicals that brain cells use to communicate with each other.
So they all work together to keep our brains running smoothly.
Exactly. It's a pretty complex system. But
Yeah.
the bottom line is that keeping those electrolytes balanced is crucial for brain health.
So we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have, from the heart to the muscles to the nerves and finally to the brain.
It's amazing how important electrolytes are for our entire body.
It really is. Those tiny minerals have a huge impact.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are the main things you want listeners to take away from all this?
Well, first of all, pay attention to those signs and symptoms of electrolyte imbalances.
Right. We've talked about a lot of them.
Muscle weakness, fatigue, cramps, numbness, tingling, confusion, headaches.
Yeah, the list goes on.
It does. So it's important to listen to your body and not ignore any weird changes.
And if you do notice something, especially if it comes on suddenly or is really bad, what should you do?
Go see a doctor right away. Don't wait.
Early detection is key.
It is. Now remember that preventing these imbalances is always the best approach.
So how do we do that?
Eating a balanced diet with lots of fruits, veggies, and whole grains can help.
And staying hydrated, of course.
Super important, especially when it's hot out or if you're exercising.
And if you have any health conditions like kidney disease or heart failure, it's even more important to talk to your doctor about managing your electrolytes.
Right. They can keep an eye on those levels, adjust your medications, and give you personalized advice.
It's all about being proactive and taking care of ourselves.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to ask questions. If you're worried about your electrolytes or just want to learn more, talk to your doctor.
Knowledge is power.
It is. When it comes to your health, being informed is the best way to stay healthy.
Well said. We've covered a ton of information in this deep dive about electrolytes and their impact on our health.
We have. It's been a wild ride.
It has. But hopefully now you have a better understanding of these amazing minerals and how they keep our bodies functioning properly.
And how to keep them in check.
Exactly. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of electrolytes.
It's been fun.
It has. We'll see you next time for another exciting exploration into health and wellness. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and take care of the child.